Hello, and welcome to Wavescan, the international DX program from Adventist World Radio, researched and written by Dr. Adrian Peterson in Indianapolis, Indiana, and produced in the studios of WRMI Shortwave in Miami. My name is Ray Robinson, and this week the program is being recorded in the studios of KVOH Los Angeles. Jeff White, our regular host, is still suffering from a bout of laryngitis, but he expects to be back in front of the microphone next week. On today's program, we have the next episode in our series of historical tributes to shortwave station WYFR and its predecessors. We have an interview with a long-time transmitter engineer at the WYFR facility in Okeechobee, Florida, and we have the monthly Bangladesh DX report. But first, the tribute to WYFR. This is episode 7, The Wartime Years and Beyond. On the last occasion, when we presented an episode on the historic background of shortwave station WYFR, we came to the year 1942. At this stage, there were just 3 transmitters on the air at the newly developed shortwave station located at Hatherley Beach, near Scituate, in coastal Massachusetts. These transmitters were on the air with 20 kilowatts as WRUL and WRUW, and WRUS at 5 kilowatts. Under construction and not yet fully completed at this time were 2 50-kilowatt transmitters that could be combined for a total output power of 100 kilowatts. Our story today covers the events that took place in the unfolding history of this large radio station and its service with the Voice of America during the wartime years and into the first years of the new peacetime back in the middle of the last century. Actually, even before the entry of the United States into World War II and the formation of the Voice of America, station WRUL was on the air with special programming on behalf of the United States government. Back in September 1939, WRUL began transmitting programming beamed towards Europe in cooperation with the British Security Commission, which had established an office in New York City. Then, in April 1940, WRUL made a series of shortwave broadcasts on behalf of the Western powers, urging all Norwegian ships still at sea to head towards neutral or Allied ports. Later in the same year, WRUL began programming in the Norwegian language on behalf of the Royal Norwegian Information Services in New York City. Special programming in the Arabic language began on February 9, 1942. Several of the regular programs produced and broadcast by WRUL, together with the other 2 transmitters, WRUW and WRUS, were relayed by the BBC in London and by the Free French station in the Congo, Radio FZI in Brazzaville. When the United States government, under the newly formed Office of War Information, or OWI, negotiated with the active shortwave stations on the air at the time for a takeover, Walter Lemon at WRUL fiercely resisted. It is stated that Walter Lemon's loyalty was not questioned. He just wished to retain his station as an independent unit. During these years, station WRUL was on the air in 24 languages beamed to Europe, Africa, and Latin America. All of the other shortwave stations in America were taken over on November 1, 1942, and under this agreement they were still operated by their owners on behalf of the American government. Programming was still produced by many of these stations, though now under the purview of OWI. 3 days later, at 3:30 p.m. on November 4th, the FCC and the Board of War Communications signed an order in Washington, D.C., requiring the closure of WRUL and a takeover by the government. At the same time next day, Thursday, November 5th, federal agents moved in, entered the station, and officially closed it down. The program line from their new studios in New York City was cut, and the station went silent. Next day, OWI programming was fed to WRUL, and the station became an effective part of the newly developing Voice of America network. That was Friday, November 6, 1942. And then 2 days later, Sunday, November 8th, the United States Navy carried out its initial invasion of North Africa. The battleship USS Texas was already off the Atlantic coast of Morocco near Rabat, with a 5 kilowatt medium wave transmitter tuned to 601 kilohertz. At 4:30 a.m. local time, the untested shipboard transmitter was activated and fed with live programming from its own studio, as well as with off-air relays from the BBC in London and OWI from the United States. Shortwave WRUL at Hatherley Beach was now on the air with a cooperative relay of this concerted OWI programming. That same evening, WRUL was on the air to Latin America with the news of the day, and the list of transmitters shows that the old 5 kilowatt WRUS was now relicensed as WRUX. The new 50 kilowatt WRUS, still under installation, was now on the air for this broadcast to Latin America, though apparently on a temporary basis. In April of the next year, 1943, the FCC cancelled the license of the 5 kilowatt call sign WRUS, and on May 1st, the new 50 kilowatt WRUS was ready for programming. The additional 50 kilowatt WRUA was ready for programming in the middle of the month, May 15th. Both WRUS and WRUA were combined at times into a single 100 kilowatt unit, usually under the single call sign WRUA. The old 5 kilowatt WRUS, when reactivated as WRUX, was in use for the relay of news bulletins in Morse code, and later, when a new power amplifier at 80 kilowatts was added, it was noted with regular programming on behalf of the Voice of America. During this era, the WRUL transmitters were on the air, radiating from 5 rhombic antennas beamed towards Europe, Africa, and Latin America. During the year 1947, Walter Lemon gained the right to program his stations at 25% of the time, with VOA AFRS programming at 75%. In anticipation of the return of WRUL to its own programming, Walter Lemon held a celebration at the Boston studios at 133 Commonwealth Avenue on February 7th. However, this matter was not fully settled until mid-year as part of the Smith-Munt Act before Congress. A new set of call signs appeared for the shortwave transmitters at Scituate in August 1950. These were finally formalized by the FCC on January 1st, 1951. Instead of a different call sign for each transmitter, they were all bundled together under the one call sign WRUL, with a suffix number indicating each specific unit. And these are the details of the new consolidated call signs. The old WRUL at 50 kilowatts became WRUL-1. WRUA at 50 kilowatts became WRUL-2. WRUS at 50 kilowatts became WRUL-3. WRUW at 20 kilowatts became WRUL-4, and WRUX, first at 5 kilowatts and later at 80 kilowatts, became WRUL-5. The date for the end of official service with the Voice of America and the Armed Forces Radio Service, VOA and AFRS, was set for June 30th, 1953. Beginning the next day, WRUL was now back into full private ownership with only its own programming. However, in spite of this declaration, station WRUL continued to relay some of the VOA and AFRS programming for the next 6 years. And that's where we pick up the story again next time. You're listening to Wavescan, the international DX program from Adventist World Radio. Now, before Jeff White succumbed to laryngitis, he spoke with one of the transmitter engineers at WRMI, Harry Robbins, about his many years of working at the Okeechobee, Florida facility when it was still operating under the call letters WYFR. Here's Jeff.
We're actually in the control room here of the old WYFR, the new WRMI, here in Okeechobee with one of the engineers who has been here for many years, Harry Robbins. Welcome.
I've been here since 1997.
Wow, okay.
October, I believe.
And you're one of the new engineers, right? I mean, in a way.
Yeah. Bob Costanza was he's the only person who was hired after me that's still here.
Okay. So that means there's a lot of people here. There were a lot of people here who had been here for many years.
Oh yeah, many years. I did. When I first started, I think Terry was the last one who was hired before I was.
Terry Elders.
Terry Elders. 8 years before I was hired.
Oh, wow.
And I was low man on the totem pole for many years until we finally got down to the point where we had to hire some more people.
Now, when you came here in '97, how many people were working here? More or less.
I don't know, about 15 or 20.
Wow. Huh. And you had 14 transmitters at that time?
Yeah, we had 14 transmitters at that time. They were not all on the air 24 hours a day that they were at a later time, but yeah, they were all here and all operating.
Uh-huh. And your background, Harry, was you were an electronics teacher, right?
Yeah, my background in electronics goes back to high school. And I was in analog. I worked for Boeing for a couple of years. I worked for Systems Engineering Laboratories in Fort Lauderdale, Burroughs in Hollywood for a year or two. And about that time is when I started teaching, and I taught on and off for 20-some years, full-time, part-time, and also had my own business, telephone answering machine repair in Fort Lauderdale.
Wow.
From about 1974 or 75 until 86 when we closed it.
Now that was when the telephone answering machines used cassettes?
Well, when we started out, they were reel to reel. They were $600 a piece. You could afford to get one repaired and pay to have it repaired because it was a large investment. It finally got down to the point where you could buy a telephone answering machine for $100. It wasn't worth repairing at that point. If it quit, you just got a new one.
Yeah. Now, are you from the Okeechobee area?
No. I was born in New Jersey. My parents moved to Miami in 1949. I lived in Miami till I went away to work for Boeing in 1960. Moved back, went to Miami-Dade Junior College, and then moved to Fort Lauderdale in 64 or so. And I stayed there until 96, no. Yeah, it was 96, I think.
Well, now, how did you end up at WYFR? Were you a shortwave? Did you know anything about shortwave listening?
No. I really didn't know about shortwave. But when I moved to Okeechobee, I sent out resumes to everybody in town. And the only answer I got back was from Dan Ellier here at WYFR saying, we don't have an opening at the moment, but we'll keep your resume on file, we'll keep your name on file. And it was about a year and a half later, he finally sent me a letter and said, hey, we have an opening. Are you interested? Well, I got the letter the day I was leaving on vacation to go down the Keys. And I said, well, okay, I'll contact you when I come back. When I came back and called, then Dan was on vacation. So it was another couple of weeks before I came in for the interview. And then one of my references was at the school where I taught in Fort Lauderdale. And when he contacted there, the chief instructor was on vacation. Had to wait until he came back from vacation before he could get a reference. Oh yeah, he worked here and he was reasonably good, I guess. And then, I got hired.
Wow. So, and you said that when you came here, you had never seen anything quite like this.
No. This equipment is so it's so large. I was used to little things, 1,000 watts, a couple of thousand watts, but nothing 10,000 watts, like 100,000 watts, sorry, like we have here on a bunch of these transmitters.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And so, was it difficult to learn how they work and what you had to do?
I have to tip my hat to Terry Elders. When I started on the board. Mm-hmm. At that time, we had cassettes, and you had to play the cassettes at the top of the hour and rewind them and get the new cassettes for the new top of the hour and that kind of thing. And Terry actually taught me all of the mechanical stuff I needed to know about all of the equipment around here. Mm-hmm. My background was in electronics, but I didn't know the particulars of the transmitters here, and I take my hat off to Terry because he did a good job. I was with him we were partners for, I don't know, probably 5 years, and then things happened and we traded, and I had different people as partners.
But you mentioned the board operator and the cassettes and all that. That, of course, has long since ceased to exist, right?
Yes, that's absolutely true. And that was new when it was fairly new when I got here. The people who were here before me talked about the reel-to-reel tapes, and of course, all of the programming from here. WYFR's programming came from California, and it came in on the cassette tapes. When we rebroadcast for China, Free Radio Free China, and BBC, that came in via satellite usually, and that was direct. And then we got away from that and got the what was called the DELET system, all computerized stuff, and we got the programming on CDs, and the CDs had to be loaded into the computer, and it's rescheduled so that it would play at the right time. And then later, they went from CDs. They mailed us a hard drive every couple of weeks, and everything was put in all at once rather than one CD at a time. Yeah. And that was a lot better. And then it got to the point where everything came in over the internet, and that was nice. It came in, got put into the computer system, and played at the right time most of the time. Yeah. And it was a lot easier to handle by that time.
So nowadays, you don't have that much programming work to do. It's more working with the transmitters, right?
Absolutely, right. Yeah, the programming board operator's job is practically nothing now because everything's computer controlled. It comes in over the internet. The computers decide when to play it, except for we have to make sure it gets to the right transmitter. Yeah. And that used to be computer controlled until the computer we had stopped working. Unfortunately, the interface for it is an old type interface, and you can't find computers with that kind of outputs anymore. Everything's USB ports, and that is not. It's an old plug system. I don't really know about it because it was there, and it was originally an old DOS program, and it got updated, and but it's still beyond my capabilities of understanding the computer digital stuff.
So mainly what you do is turn transmitters on and off, and
to make sure they get tuned, make sure they come up at the right time, make sure they get turned off at the right time, etc. And if there's any problem, try to figure out what the problem is and try to get around it or solve it or what have you.
And as I've seen here, these transmitters are at least partially water cooled, so you even have to bells come on when they need water, right?
Right. Hopefully. If somebody hasn't flipped the switch off, when they need water. They're water cooled, and it has to be distilled water, so that because we have, they're normally at 12,000 volts plate voltage. They're down to half power right now, which is around 6,000 volts. But at 12,000 volts, I understand, although I have not seen it, that if you get dirty water, it arcs across the water and causes quite a bit of problem.
Okay. So when it needs water, you have to get one of these big 5-gallon bottles of distilled water and actually put it in a tube that goes into the transmitter.
Yeah, there's a reservoir, more or less, in the transmitter that cools the three of the 4 tubes that are in the transmitter, the modulators and the power amplifier, or the RF power amplifier.
Okay. Now, when did you leave WYFR?
My last day was June the 9th of this past year.
Okay, so just before it went off the air.
Yeah, just before it went off the air. Yeah.
Okay. And now we've coaxed you back in from retirement.
Yes. It's good. I only work a couple of days a week. And that's enough.
Keeps you in practice.
Yeah, well, I started out here full time, and when I got 65, I said, okay, it's time to relax a little bit.
That was Harry Robbins, an engineer at WRMI in Okeechobee, Florida, which until recently was the shortwave facility of Family Radio under the call letters WYFR. And thank you also to Jeff. It was good to hear you again, and we look forward to having you back in front of the mic next week. Now it's time for the monthly Bangladesh DX report from Salahuddin Dolar. Over to you, Salahuddin.
Dear listeners and radio hobbyists, welcome you in the first edition of Bangladesh DX report in Webscan in 2014. This is Salahuddin Dolar from Rajshahi, Bangladesh. Glad to be back and thanks for listening. I also want to thank Mr. Parthasarathi Goswami of India and Mr. Didarul Iqbal of Bangladesh for their kind tips and suggestions. Let's start. CRI Bangladesh Bekar FM agreement. On 24th December 2013, Bangladesh Bekar and China Radio International signed an agreement of airing China Radio International's Bengali and English program on FM via Bangladesh Bekar in Dhaka and Chittagong. According to the agreement, from January 1st, 2014, China Radio International Bengali and English program are being aired on FM 102 MHz in Dhaka and FM 90 MHz in Chittagong from 0000 to 1800 QTC. Voice of Russia Bengali. Voice of Russia shut down its Bengali service website from January 1st, 2014 due to lack of funding. Voice of Russia dropped their Bengali transmission on shortwave on 29th March 2009. Now the receiving log of different radio stations. January 1st, China Radio International Bengali at 0200 to 0240 UTC on 11640 kHz. The SI code was 444. Deutsche Welle English at 2120 to 2150 UTC on 11800 kHz. The SI code was 333. January 2nd, All India Radio at 0020 to 0030 UTC on 4840 kHz. The SI code was 444. Radio Saudi Arabia in English at 1000 to 1030 UTC on 15 to kilohertz. The SIO code was 322. January 3rd, Radio Veritas Asia Bengali at 0032 0057 UTC on 15265 kilohertz. The SIO code was 444. January 6th, Voice of America English at 1500 to 1530 UTC on 17895 kilohertz. The SIO code was 444. Adventist World Radio in English at 1600 to 1628 UTC on 15225 kilohertz. The SIO code was 444. January 7th, Radio Australia in English at 0400 to 0410 UTC on 17840 kilohertz. The SIO code was 333. BBC Bengali at 1330 to 1400 UTC on 5845 kilohertz. The SIO code was 555. All India Radio Kashmir at 1520 to 1530 UTC on 4970 kilohertz. The SIO code was 444. January 8, Voice of America in Bengali at 1600 to 1630 UTC on 11850 kilohertz. The SIO code was 333. January 12, PCJ Media Radio at 1330 to 1400 UTC on 9335 kilohertz. The SIO code was 343. Radio Santec in English at 1500 to 1520 UTC on 15190 kilohertz. The SIO code was 333. January 13th, Radio Tehran in Bengali at 1500 to 1525 UTC on 9620 kilohertz. The SIO code was 444. Okay, I will come with more DX news in the next edition. Till then, take care. Salahuddin Dollar, Rajshahi, Bangladesh.
Thank you, Salahuddin. And that's about all we have time for on this week's edition. Thank you for listening to Wavescan, the international DX program from Adventist World Radio, researched and written in Indianapolis. On next week's program, we have Freedom at Midnight, the Pakistan story, and also the monthly Australian DX report. There are 2 QSL cards available for reception of this broadcast, one from AWR and also one from WRMI if you're listening on a WRMI frequency. You can obtain both by writing to Wavescan at the following address: P.O. Box 29235, Indianapolis, Indiana 46229 in the USA. Or you may email to wavescan@awr.org. Thank you again for listening. 73s and good DX.